Hello and welcome to the I3 lecture series hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography here at the School of Visual Arts. I'm Julie Graham. Tonight's guest is the multifaceted Mr. Sharkey. I was introduced to his photography soon after I started publishing my online magazine, A Curator, in 2010. I haven't mentioned this to the students yet, but please check it out, acurator.com. Sharkey sent me his long-term project, Queer Kids, which is photographs and interviews with gay teenagers. And I leapt at the opportunity to publish the portraits and the stories, and it remains the most popular feature in my magazine to this day, 13 years later. Since then, Michael's gone on to create a fabulous variety of work, some of which we will be treated to tonight. So, welcome.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you all for coming out on this chilly evening. I have a couple of reasons to thank Julie this evening. The first is for inviting me here. She called me back in July, so I've had several months to do something I rarely, if ever, have had the opportunity to do, which is recollect at length about the work I've made over the past 20 years. This past summer, when I first began thinking about what I might want to talk about tonight, I immediately seized upon an idea that I return to often, and that is the veracity of the photographic image. How the medium has the ability to compel us, as James Agee once said, to perceive simply the cruel radiance of what is. He believed that the camera was capable of transmitting as no other medium could, quote, the peculiar kinds of poetic vitality which blaze in every real thing, end quote. Today I shoot only digital images, but my career begins in the world of analog photography. And at every step along the way, I've maintained a stubborn devotion to this fundamental quality that photographs and all lens-based media possess. In an age of artificial intelligence and virtual reality, I will happily join the Luddites and stay put right here in the real world. I am, after all, a photographer, a portraitist first and foremost, not an illustrator or designer who digitally renders scenes from my imagination. The faces you will gaze upon this evening belong to real people, a few of whom you'll likely recognize. I moved to New York City in 1995. For the first couple of years, I worked in what was then called electronic publishing. The internet was brand new, and all the world's information was slowly, steadily migrating online, and I was one of many tasked in assisting this endeavor. It was a decent paying 9 to 5, but after 2 years of mostly mind-numbing work, I needed a change. This from a journal entry of mine dated August 28th, 1997. Of all these things which I'm now currently engaged, only one is of any interest, and that is photography. I will begin a studio class at SVA on the 17th, and I'm very excited about it. Also, I've been looking very closely at fashion photographs and think more and more that is something I could bear to do as a means of making some money. Some are truly remarkable and very technically precise, which at this beginning stage is very appealing. But how in the world would I break in? I knew absolutely no one. I took that studio lighting course here at SVA. Actually, it was the location on the east side. And then another in alternative processes, and I knew right away that this was something I could enjoy spending my time doing. The science of it, the precision, the necessity for immaculate dust-free surfaces. Cameras as objects of beauty and technical magic had lured me since I was a child, and I was already an amateur photographer. But I had never previously considered photography as a vocation or really understood that you could be a professional photographer. Still, though, photography seemed to possess all the qualities that might help me sustain creative work, and if I could get paid while doing it, well, it would hardly seem like work. This was the late 90s, so the industry was at full tilt. But even more important to me was the idea of making creative work in the company of others, collaborating with set designers, makeup artists, stylists, etc. So I'm beginning with fashion because that's where I began. I'm not going to say much about these photos specifically, other than making them was my introduction to the manufacturing of images. And the vernacular of fashion, with its gloss and glamour and high production value, continues to leave its mark on my work. Less than a year after that journal entry, I quit my job and got another one working in the equipment room at an upscale photo studio in Soho. This was a kind of baptism by fire. The place was filled with high-end fashion and portrait photographers on assignment for a day or maybe for as long as a week. My knowledge of gum bichromate and palladium emulsions was of absolutely no use to anyone. But I did know my way around studio lights. And even though these fancy photographers had at least one or two highly skilled assistants in tow, they always needed an extra pair of hands for something. Before long, I was being called to fill in for a missing assistant, which led to more assistant work at various studios around town, and then eventually on location. For the next 5 years, I assisted dozens of photographers while slowly building a portfolio of my own. In the evenings, I took nightlife photographs for the Patrick McMullen Agency, which, if you don't know, was the go-to for all nightlife, society, and celebrity event photographs. This was the age of Peter Gatien, the Canadian nightclub impresario with a pirate's eye patch, who helmed the now mythical clubs Limelight, Twilo, The Tunnel, and Club USA. And those were just a small few of the many clubs, bars, and other spaces where Wall Street bankers, their girlfriends, club kids, and artists of every imaginable variety all gathered together at night to party. It was a decadent time, despite Giuliani and the mayor's office. And it was also my education. All photography, all the time. Before the digital revolution, which was to completely upend the medium, I looked forward to spending every waking moment either making photographs or talking about making them. Magazine kiosks as ubiquitous as Starbucks and overflowing with literally hundreds of titles became our libraries. We spent more on magazines than we did on food, and we'd sit for hours pouring through the thousands of pages of ads and editorials, critiquing and dissecting them in minute detail. How many catchlights reflected in the eye of this model? Is that an umbrella or a softbox? And at what angle and distance was it in relation to the subject precisely? It was all-consuming. The majority of my friends were also photographers or worked in the industry, and we were all perfectly happy doing nothing else. Each year, dozens of new titles appeared, and New York was the magazine capital of the world. My first year shooting, I worked for over 30 publications. If you are a working editorial photographer in New York, you might expect to spend at least a couple of days every week traveling across the country or occasionally to Europe to shoot on assignment. One year I clocked 92 flights. Thankfully, gone are the days of traveling with multiple large cameras, reams of X-ray sensitive film, plus a small studio's worth of lights and grip. It was exhausting, but it was also a total blast. By the end of my assisting career, I managed to cobble together 2 portfolios, one fashion and the other portraits, and began shopping them around to my editors. Began shopping them around to any editors I could wrangle into a meeting. As a gay man, it was perfectly natural to be expected to shoot fashion, and at first I found it quite creative. For me, it was never really a love of clothes, but rather a chance to play with color, texture, and light. It took me a few years, but I finally came to the same conclusion that most everyone comes to. What we all really want is a good story. Ironically, fashion spreads are called stories, but they are one-dimensional stories without narrative and without any character development. I needed something meatier, something soulful and satisfying, if this was really how I was going to spend all of my time. It's now the spring of 2006. I've been shooting editorial portraits across the country for 2 full years. My regular clients include People Magazine, Newsweek, Interview, New York Magazine, and about a dozen other titles that no longer exist. For each of them, I'm making mostly environmental portraits, people in their homes or at work or some location relevant to the article being written. Occasionally sets are built and props are acquired or constructed. Sometimes I'm making portraits entirely out of context on a white cyc in a studio. But wherever I am, I'm using exactly the same equipment, the most significant being studio strobe lights, which, I might argue, is the defining style of my generation's magazine photographers. Because the shoots are so expensive to produce, and because we were often photographing famous personalities or people with very limited time to share, having complete control over light was essential. I grew so accustomed to and seduced by the power of strobes to augment the spectacle of an image that I've never abandoned them. Very few, if any, of the photos I'm sharing this evening will be made without artificial light. Sometimes many strobes if I have to light a large interior. I think another defining characteristic of my portraiture is that I take a great interest in the people I photograph. If they'd made a movie or TV show, I'd watch it. If they'd written a book, I'd read it, or at least as much as I could manage to beforehand. And also do whatever research I could about the film, book, building, album, or exhibition being celebrated. I began to think of myself as a collector. I was collecting culture and history. And because my subjects were so often gay, I was not only making portraits of this growing community, united often by a political agenda, I was also making documents, historical artifacts. It is with this mindset that I come to the realization that I need a solid long-term project, something that I can turn to in my downtime, focusing my creative energy. A project where ideas can be more fully developed. The previous October, Time magazine published a cover story titled "The Battle Over Gay Teens," which had caught my attention. In 2006, George W. Bush was in the second half of his second term, and the culture was noticeably shifting. My first Queer Kids shoot is actually labeled "Gay Teens" because it was still too taboo to use the word queer. This is a comment online from someone who saw one of the earlier iterations of Queer Kids. Shame on you for calling gay and lesbian youth queer, as if they don't hear it enough from bullies. Stop it. I knew at the time that the title might ruffle some feathers, but I had also an idea about where the language was heading, though I may not have guessed then just how pervasive the term would become. One thing about portraits, which I find utterly fascinating, is that their value is self-evident. By that I mean you never really have to explain or even understand why you should or shouldn't make a portrait or self-portrait. Everyone is a worthy subject. Sure, some people may possess qualities that make them more compelling, a revealing or withholding expression, a certain self-possession. But each of us desire and deserve to be seen and remembered. I was here. I do exist. I'm thinking now of the multitude of stenciled hands on a cave wall made almost 10,000 years ago with what was undoubtedly the same assertion, or the famed mummy portraits of Roman Egypt, uncanny in their naturalism. This is my portrait. Remember me. I think it is this quality that allows some portraits, say those of Goya, Manet, Irving Penn, or Peter Hujar, to attain an almost supernatural lucency, or, as A.G. put it, radiance. It is also a kind of necromancy. We are communicating with the dead, and the dead are made living. In addition, a still portrait possesses a portal to that other world that a moving image cannot afford. The performance of a moving figure naturally turns the viewer into audience, whereas a still image allows for contemplation, and if you remain silent long enough, conversation. When I look at Penn's extraordinary portrait of Carson McCullers, for instance, I'm experiencing an intimacy with her that all of her books combined don't reveal. Over the next couple of years, I traveled around the country California, Florida, Colorado, Washington State, and made as many portraits of young queer people as I could afford to, while also conducting short interviews I would record on video. Travel wasn't even the biggest expense. I was still shooting film. In order to defray some of the costs, I would occasionally tack on an extra day while traveling on assignment and squeeze in a portrait or two. At the end of a few years, I had made enough to present the project in one way or another. And this is where I get to thank Julie again. As she mentioned, the reason I got to know Julie and how we became friends is she was the first person to champion the project enthusiastically, publishing it on her site, A Curator. I was thrilled. It was because of this initial interest and support that people began paying attention to the project. Over the next couple of years, Time Magazine's Lightbox, The Guardian, Huffington Post, New York Magazine, Slate, and many others featured the project online and also occasionally in print. My first Queer Kids exhibition came about because a colleague I worked with often, a journalist from Paris named Iris, has a father who ran an art gallery in Perpignan in the south of France. From there, Queer Kids exhibitions were mounted at the Stonewall National Museum and Archives in Florida, Rainbow House in Brussels, and Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire. In each of these instances, I traveled to the exhibitions and took up residence making new Queer Kids work, and so the project continues to grow, though at a much slower pace these days. So these are just a few screen grabs of the online outlets that featured Queer Kids. And you can see in some of them that, you know, there's 777 Facebook shares there. I remember HuffPo editor calling me and saying that they had over 200,000 page views in the first, I don't know, few hours of the publication. So it obviously was like hitting a nerve. And then, you know, these publications like La Repubblica from Italy, this is a Dutch newspaper, eventually the New York Times. This was a grab of my Google Analytics during the month that Time published. And eventually, I think that the country's territories actually did surpass 80, which was just mind-boggling to me that there were people all over the world looking at this project. This is a billboard in the Netherlands. And this was the first exhibition in Perpignan. And that's Phillips Exeter Academy. And as I said, I conduct interviews with all of the kids, and those have been sort of slowly compiled into video pieces that you can see online. As I said earlier, Queer Kids was something I turned to in my downtime. The rest of my energy was spent making portraits for magazines and also for myself. This is Boy George in London. I think that's 2012. Sam Smith for Capitol Records. Elton John and his husband David at their home in Windsor. The countertenor Jacob Orlinski for Warner Classics. this is something from the New Yorker, which talks about that previous photograph. I thought it was kind of presumptuous of them to imagine that they knew what my inspiration was. Because the truth is, I have a studio full of shit, and I just grabbed some stuff. And it was just something that ended up working. This is the soprano Ariadne Grief. And this is a wide shot of that shoot, so you can see what's going on. This is one of my favorite shoots I ever did for Interview magazine. It's the band White Magic. And when people look at this photograph, they know that there's something sort of uncanny, but they can't really imagine that my set designer Xeroxed photographs of birch trees and printed them out and then stapled them to real trees. Again, everything is completely analog. There's someone on this branch sprinkling confetti down. Big Frida for Bust, that was pretty recently. Donna Summer at her home in Nashville. We had a really nice day that day. Gwen Stefani. This was Adele's very first American photo shoot. She was 17 years old, I think. And she was lovely. Catherine McPhee, I don't know if anyone remembers her. Brian Ferry, for those old enough to know. Amanda Palmer. I can't remember the name of her band now. This was a young, up-and-coming singer named Bobby Joe who sadly did not make it. And this is Anoni when she was Antony of Antony and Johnson's. And this is a sort of rare instance when I am shooting an editorial and the subject likes it enough to turn it into an album cover. Genesis P. Orridge, no longer with us. And this was one of my favorite bands at the time, Peter, Bjorn, and John. And they're from Sweden or Norway. And I thought it would be cute if we made it look cold inside the studio. And I still get shudders thinking about the mess that we left behind for those poor studio. David Hockney at his home in London. That's a day I will never forget. One of my all-time heroes, Dwayne Michaels, at his home here, just a couple blocks away from here, actually. And that's with his husband, Fred. Mario Testino. I actually have the photograph that he took at that moment of me and have used it as a contributor photo, and it gets to say Mario Testino took it. That was the plan. I also shoot a lot of actors. Jane Lynch, Steve Coogan, Jason Sudeikis, Dennis Hopper at the Delano in Miami, Andrew Reynolds, Jesse Tyler Ferguson, who was publicizing a charity-based business of bow ties that he had created. So we thought it would be cute to have a multitude of bow ties. Michael Trevesnik, I think is his name. He's with the Alvin Ailey Dance Company, principal dancer. Gideon Glick. Oh, and the great Hamish Bowles in his West Village home that no longer exists, or it exists, but he no longer lives there. He's gone on to be the editor-in-chief of World of Interiors in London. And this is Andrew Bolton before he was the chief curator at the Costume Institute. They were in between exhibitions, and I was like, oh, let's use all the mannequins as extras. Zach Posen, looking very regal. Tom Brown, this is before he was really famous. Joseph Altuzarra. Chris Benz. So even though I wasn't shooting fashion any longer, a lot of fashion designers and other designers, Ron Arid, the gallerist David Gill, and I also shoot a lot of writers. This is Booker Prize winning author Marlon James. And this is Kieran Desai, who I made this portrait just about 2 weeks ago. And I sort of confessed to her that I felt like my fatal flaw, or one of my shortcomings as a portraitist, was that I was sort of unable to strip away the layers in order to sort of get to the heart of a person. And she wrote back when I sent her the selects, she said, you said you err with an idealistic eye. You are right. You don't strip away. The exact opposite. Extravagant sympathy. And I had never really thought of it that way before, but I thought it was quite nice. This is Andrew Solomon at his home in the West Village and in his bedroom. And this is Beckett Rossett. He's the son of Barney Rossett Jr., who was the American publisher of Samuel Beckett, and named after Samuel Beckett. In fact, some of you may be familiar with that iconic, very famous Avedon photograph of Beckett. It was taken in Paris in 1979. On the contact sheet, you will see a young Beckett Rossett standing next to Samuel Beckett. That's a very interesting story, which you can read about in Grand, which is a literary journal that these were made for. This is another Booker Prize winner, Alan Hollinghurst. And this is my dear friend Rosie Schaap at her aunt and uncle's place in the West Village, which she endearingly called the People's Palace. Sharon Needles, RuPaul's Drag Race winner. And then just strange people that I happen to meet and want to have their pictures taken. That's Johnny Weir, my friend Michael. Good friends Max and Mars. This is actually a married couple who wanted photographs made, and this was the one that I took away from the shoot. Amos Mack, who is a trans heartthrob, and the publisher of Original Plumbing, which is a trans male, yeah. And then occasionally I do these sort of special interest stories. This is an all-gay boxing club in Brooklyn. And these are some Bushwick kids who have an art collective. And occasionally I shoot LGBT subject matter for all different kinds of publications. This was a story on Bushwick drag queens. So I don't really know how to define projects exactly, but I think it's sort of anything that requires some sort of concerted effort, maybe on my part, whether it's multiple days of shooting or a lot of research or a lot of conceptualizing. This was actually a portfolio that I shot for myself, but I showed it to New York Magazine and they ran a whole portfolio in the magazine. And these are all principal dancers of the New York City Ballet. They were inspired by a Herb Ritts photograph from the 80s called Vladimir I, I think it's called. It's quite famous photograph of his, of a dancer, a male dancer, smoking. And the dancer has kind of exaggerated makeup, and I thought there was something interesting about that. This is an early story I did for my syndication agent at the time, Getty Images. And it's about the gay rodeo in Golden, Colorado, which is where I grew up. I had completely forgotten, actually, that I had written something about that. It was a kind of a fun story because it sort of mixed reportage with more formal portraits. This was a story on New York City's oldest gay motorcycle club, which started in 1964. This is a story that I did when I was making Sharon Needle's first music video. I directed her first music video. And these are all the extras in the video. The video was called This Club is a Haunted House. And there were probably, oh my God, I don't know. There were a lot of extras, but these are just a few of them. While Sharon was in makeup or otherwise detained, I would just make portraits of all the extras. This is one of my favorite stories. It's called Bless These Hounds, which is taken from a prayer that an Episcopalian minister offers at the beginning of a hunt. And this is all in Virginia hunt country, and I went down there for a few days. My friend Charlie and I made this story. The story is real, or there's elements of reality, and then there's also these sort of actors who are made into fictitious characters. And you'll see how that sort of plays out here. So this is a typical hunt. This was a race, so I'm sort of mixing in the reportage here. And these are actors who sort of had an enormous amount of research and inspiration for this project, which went back decades. And we just sort of created these characters. And I just kind of like the blending of the real life with the made up. So the gentleman on the left, this is his home, and it used to be the Mars estate, as in the Mars candy manufacturers, M&M. And it was an enormous estate. At one time, it was one of the largest contiguous pieces of land. I think it was 5,000 acres in Virginia. But his parents divorced, and one went to Hawaii and one went to San Francisco, and he was just left in the house alone. And so Charlie was like, all right, let's just gather all of the paintings and weird stuff in the house, and we'll fill the dining room, and that'll be one of our sets. And then I also have these sort of collaborations with artists. This is Christine. The first time I shot Christine probably was, well, it's been almost 10 years. And the reason that I know Paul is because I saw a video that he made and posted online, and I fell in love with the video, and I just emailed him, and I was like, if you ever come to New York City, please let me know. He did not email me back for 3 years, but when he did, he said he was coming to the city, and would I still like to take his picture? And I was like, yes, please. So I don't know how many times I've shot him over the past decade. A lot. If you're not familiar with his work, you should check him out. This is Ramses. He's a painter, but when I met him, he was just in the process of completing a documentary film about him running 100 miles here in New York City. And he wanted images to go along with that for publicity. And he still comes to the studio quite often, and I shoot him. This is Jack Ferver. He's a dancer and performance artist. Again, I saw him in a production at the New Museum. He was doing a piece in collaboration with a friend of mine, Mark Swanson, and I just thought it was the greatest thing I had ever seen, and so I emailed him and was like, please come to the studio. And so I've shot Jack. This is all from the very first shoot, but I've shot him about half a dozen different times now over the past 10 years. This is Joseph Keckler. He's another artist that I collaborate with often. This is digitally manipulated. This is not. That's just the shutter open and me hitting the strobe 4 times as Joseph moved, and we probably did that 100 times before we got it right. So right before the pandemic, I started taking some of my photographs and screen printing them. And sort of fell in love with that process. You'll recognize that from the New York City Ballet portfolio. It's a collage. And then during the pandemic, I started making cyanotypes. I needed to do something in isolation. I love making them. Well, one thing that I didn't talk about, but I'll just mention really quickly. When I was still shooting film, I spent many hours each week in the printing lab, and it was there that I most felt part of a community. Almost all the printers were photographers too, so we would trade industry tips and gossip, and you could really feel like you had your finger on the pulse. In those days, legwork actually meant hoofing it to Midtown or wherever the magazine offices were with large bound portfolios under your arm. Sure, it was a pain in the ass, but you got to meet people in person, get a little exercise, be out in the city. Inevitably, you'd meet a friend for lunch or pop in to see an exhibition. And meeting editors face to face meant you were actually building relationships and often lasting friendships. It wasn't long before all of that gave way to email, digital marketing, and endless hours alone in front of the computer. That part was and is still a total drag. I really miss printing, and the cyanotypes allowed me to kind of get back to printing. And it's such an inexpensive process that you can make mistakes and you can kind of feel free to experiment. And the repetition of it is something that I really enjoy, refining a process. So in 2016, I moved into a studio in Red Hook called Coffey Street Studio. And then this year, I launched Coordinated Artists. Coordinated Artists is basically a collective of artists. It's writers, directors, designers, cinematographers, performers. There's about a dozen of us so far. And one of the first projects that we worked on was in collaboration with Joseph Keckler, called Cove of Harmony. Cove of Harmony is divided into 3 parts. It's film, conversation, and performance. And the first part is a music video that I made with Joseph called Ghost Song. And I'm going to play that for you now.
One time I got into this art residency, and I was stationed in a house in the woods. And every night, as I was about to go to sleep, I would hear rapid footsteps just above my head. I knew that somewhere nearby was an octogenarian who had written for the original Dark Shadows television program, so I assumed it was him, exercising. One morning, as I was walking down a path past the office building, I saw the lady from the office. She asked me if everything was okay. I said, "Oh, I feel great, very comfortable. I hear Joe upstairs every night." She said, "You're in the building alone." So that changed my relationship to the sound. I thought it might be a squatter who's very in touch with my circadian rhythm, or maybe something else. I called a friend who knows about such things. I said, "Look, whatever this is, it's their home, not mine. I don't want to banish anybody, but is there a way I could make peace and get some sleep? My friend said, no problem. Just set out a glass of bourbon, like a glass of milk for Santa, and recite this incantation. So I poured a glass of bourbon. I poured one for myself, and I recited the incantation.
Poi è cambiato tutto. Un'aria fredda riempiva la stanza. Un vento calmo. Una presenza. Tocca un braccio, poi l'altro braccio, ed è stato ho fatto sesso con fantasma. Non il solito sesso, no, non è stato normale, ma era scialla.
Pose diverse, tipo ginnastica per anziani. Il mio fantasma faceva massaggi.
Ho alzato le braccia come un re, smarrito per ore, rabbrividendo il tempo si è dissolto. E anche io mi sono sveglio da solo la mattina, mi sono sentito una persona nuova e adesso lo so, tutti vivi dovrebbero andare a letto con i morti. Pensate a quando ai fantasmi manchi avere un corpo, a quanto leggeri vi sentirete quando lascerete il vostro e un
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. That was wonderful. Okay, any questions from the audience? Yes.
I really appreciate your sharing. So, my question is, would you pick one of your subjects to do a lifelong time show, just one person, for that person?
The question is, would I pick one subject to do a lifetime long project with?
Yeah, just one person, not yourself, but one people.
That's an interesting question. I mean, my partner of 22 years is here tonight, Jeffrey, and I sort of maybe think of him that way. But we met when we were 30, so there's 30 years before that. I have a dog that I love dearly, who I adopted at 8 weeks of age and have probably taken about 30 or 40,000 photographs of, and he just turned 3. So, yeah.
Hi, Sharkey.
Hi.
Mr. Sharkey. My name is Marcy. I am a student. Oh, sorry. I just, I'm here. Okay, I'm sorry. That kind of got me off track. First of all, I want to say that I really do, I admire what your contribution to the LGBTQ community, especially as a gay woman, and seeing that you were doing that in such a controversial time. It's just very admirable. And my question to you is, are you hiring? No. Okay, my actual question is, I'm curious about that transition between, the project that you were doing, your personal projects, to working with larger names and things like that. So I'm kind of wondering, what was that like? Were you freelancing? Were you under contract with somebody? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I think the question is, how did I sort of transition from the Queer Kids project to editorial work? They were concurrent. So I started shooting editorially in 2004 after 5 years of assisting. And during those 5 years, I built a portfolio and shopped the portfolio around. And they've always gone side by side. They inform each other, I think. I mean, all of the sort of personal projects I do, I think, inform my editorial work and vice versa.
Thank you so much.
Hi, my question is about the Queer Kids project that you did, because you weren't under contract. It was just your own passion project, right? My question is, how did you set up that whole project? Did you did you initially fund it yourself? Did you have a grant or something? Did you have the contacts already? Did you reach out to people? How did you just make that a reality?
So the question is, how did I make Queer Kids a reality? Logistically and in practical terms. Many different ways, but it's mostly self-funded. I did receive a grant in 2017, but the project was already 11 years old by that time. It really is just, cobbled together over quite a long period of time. So I began in the spring of 2006, and just worked on it when I could. And I mean, in 2006, the resources for finding subjects were much more limited than they are today. Eventually, once the project was being seen widely, it was much easier to find subjects. And there was a multitude of ways in which I went about finding subjects. I don't know, does that answer your question?
Kind of, I guess. Oh, sorry.
I mean, is there something more specific about the logistics that I could answer?
I guess, but it's mostly has to do with my own projects right now. I'm trying to work on projects and do like exhibitions and stuff. And I guess that was like the question a little bit more like how did you end up doing exhibitions? I guess I just am not very familiar how that works.
Yeah, I mean, that is a complicated process, and a lot of it is serendipity and also just people that you know. Nepotism absolutely is a real thing. I mean, as I said earlier, I was working quite closely with a French journalist named Iris, and she saw the project and knew that her father would be interested in showing it. And so that was the first exhibition. I actually don't remember how Stonewall Museum and Archives saw the project. I don't remember how that happened. Phillips Exeter Academy, one of the administrators there I went to college with, and she was familiar with the project.
Got it. So is it like the initial one was maybe funded through like a friend or something, or like that was made a reality, but then people found the project and it became like a bigger thing? Is that kind of like how that?
I mean, I have to say Queer Kids is mostly self-funded, and it's you know, up until the grant of 2017, it was mostly just coming out of my pocket, and it was a considerable sum of money. And so I had to pay for printing and all of that stuff.
Got it. Okay.
Shipping.
Just curious.
Sometimes
yeah.
people would help. I mean, galleries do help sometimes in regards to that, or they'll offer a stipend or something like that.
Got it. Okay. So you didn't have to like pay for the spaces. I wasn't sure like how you would do that, like rent out the whole space or anything.
No, I mean, if it's part of the programming of the gallery, then they don't charge for that.
Okay, thank you. I'm just interested, like just
Yeah,
in how that works,
I mean, I
guess.
wish that there was a resource that I could point you to. I mean, maybe, do you know something that's like a solid resource for exhibition making? I mean, I think I think what you really want to do is to do more research about not-for-profit arts institutions. And they often have resources for funding and other types of resources too.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll try. Yeah, thank you.
I would just briefly add, it all adds up. So all the editorial exposure you get, and potentially some of that, you know, I don't pay the artists who appear in my magazine, so that's a freebie. But the number of eyeballs that you get on that, somebody in there might either be a gallerist or know somebody. You know, it's not, you don't make a shoot and then get a show, right? There's all these other like underpinnings. Did you want to add to that, Stella? Not really, no. Okay. Stella.
I think the points that you were making, there are resources that you can find online. There are people, I mean, I know Deborah Klomching talks a lot. She has a gallery in Dumbo. She teaches here. And she talks about how to do exhibitions and, you know, how to get an exhibition, how to deal with a gallery, all that kind of thing. So you might want to look into her.
Okay. Thank you.
And then there's a place called the Foundation Center, although it has a different name now. I'm not sure what it is now. That's in Lower Manhattan, that has these gigantic books.
The New York Foundation for the Arts, I think it is now.
Is it? Okay, they've got these gigantic books which basically will tell you about all these people and places and grants that they give, and, you know, for I mean, don't be offended, but like blonde-haired people, for example. There will be a page that will have grants for blonde-haired people. No, seriously. And it's this wonderful resource that not many people know about. It's like a library. You can go there. It's a free resource. And you can look through these literally gigantic books.
Great. Thank you.
So yes, I guess I did have something to say. You know.
Thanks so much. Those portraits were awesome. And yeah, I was just curious, like, what's your approach to that stripping away you mentioned and getting that like really tender moment with people?
I'm glad that you see that. The question is, what is my approach? I mean, it really depends on the subject. I often feel like I mean, the reason that I titled the lecture this evening Art and Artifice, I often feel like I'm adding layers, not stripping away. I do want something essential and truthful to be revealed, but I also want to augment and beautify and sort of present an almost idealized version of the person. As an editorial photographer, I'm paid to make people look beautiful, and that's part of the job. So I think it just carries over into other aspects of my work.
Hi, thank you for sharing. I want to ask you, as a young photographer, how to connection people work in fashion industry, like stylist, makeup artist, and how to get chance shoot for the big brand and the celebrity. Yeah.
This is, you're asking how in the world of fashion to acquire clients, essentially, and also collaborators?
Yeah, connect with stylists.
So I am not in the world of fashion and haven't been for many, many years. When I was shooting fashion, there was no social media. We had resources like Le Book, which maybe still exists, I'm not sure, but it listed all of the agencies, the photographers, the stylists, the makeup artists, the set designers, and that was my resource for potential collaborators in that regard. Certainly today with social media, I would imagine that Instagram is probably your best bet. I mean, I continue to connect with people on Instagram. I am not a successful commercial photographer, and I don't have a lot of commercial clients. So I just wouldn't be able to point you in that direction. I think, you know, a lot of photographers that do commercial work, or predominantly commercial work, have agents, and the agencies are doing a lot of the groundwork in terms of client acquisition. Certainly, having your images published in an editorial context it's essentially like having an advertisement for yourself. So that's always a good. I mean, I don't even know what magazines exist anymore today. There's very few, but I guess the online platforms that are widely seen. And you know, much of the work that I did as a young photographer, I did for free. So I would make photographs and then hope someone might run them. And sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. I showed a lot of images tonight, but it's just a very, very small fraction of the amount of work that I've made over the past 2 decades.
Any more for any more? Yes.
Thank you so much for the talk. This was really good to see. You mentioned you shoot film. I personally also prefer shooting film, but where do you see, like, and you also mentioned in some of the shoots, it's like high production value. Now with technology, like a lot of things can also be done in post-production, right? Like the foreground and the background. So where do you see like the photography moving forward with advances in technology? Do you see it actively harming the craft or helping in some ways? Like, where do you see it evolve?
So the question is, where do I see the craft of photography in the future in terms of analog versus digital, let's say? I mean, make art by any means necessary is my motto, but I love the unique characteristic of lens-based media to sort of raise the bar in the degree of reality, the degree of veracity that's achieved. So there's something, you can make art and do, whatever media is available to you, by all means. But in order to make a document, there does need to be a certain degree of veracity achieved. And that's something that cameras do that nothing else does. So I would just say that's something to be excited about and to hold precious. It'll be very interesting to see how that shapes up moving forward with AI. I know people are talking about having some kind of stamp on the images that would designate them as real photographs. I don't know how in the world that's going to work, but I'm interested to see how people will do that, certainly.
Yeah, we've tried it. Next. Yes.
Hi, thank you for sharing with us. My question is, for your Queer Kids project, how did you contact your subjects? Because you told us you were traveling around the country. Did you already meet them before, or you went there to meet them? Did you know who you were meeting, or you just went there to find out?
So the question is, how did I find my Queer Kids subjects? So in the very beginning, I went through something that was called GLISTEN, which was the Gay and Lesbian Student Education Network. I don't know if that still exists. These were sort of, what do you call them? They were in American high schools and sort of growing rapidly in the early 2000s. When I was on assignment, I would know where I was going geographically, and I would often use, you might not remember this platform called MySpace, but you could sort of designate a demographic and a geographic locale at the same time using a zip code. And I often would just reach directly out and be like, I'm coming to town if you know anyone. It really was kind of word of mouth, So, yeah, it was a kind of labor-intensive process, like locating the kids. But I mean, the thing about young people is that they have a ton of friends. So they would invite their friends, and one subject would turn into 6.
Thank you. Any last question? No? Okay, thank you so much.
Oh my God, thank you guys.
Thank you, thank you.